Hello and welcome to Candid Scale Modeling Beginner Build-Along. What the heck is a build-along? Kind of what it sounds like. I'm going to be building this step by step, right from the instructions. I'm not going to skip around, jump ahead, jump back, sub-assemblies and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to start at step one and work all the way through. A couple things though that I'm not going to be doing. There's a shroud. I don't really care for how it looks, and it's kind of a pain in the butt. I'm also not going to do the figures. I'll do the figures in a different video somewhere down the line. Right now, I'm just going to focus on the tank itself. I also am not going to be using an airbrush. I am going to be hand painting. Please be gentle. My hand painting skills are not the best. As a beginner, you're most likely going to be hand painting. So I'm going to be hand painting it, and we'll see how it goes. So with all that, I'll stop blabbering on. Let's get to the next part, which is the tools to be used, and then we'll get to the build. So real quick before we begin, I'm going to go through the items that you're going to see me using throughout this build. I'm not using any fancy tools or expensive products. Very basic list, very short list. You do not have to, go out and break the bank to get this done. First thing you're going to need is the kit. You can get on Amazon. This one I found at Hobby Lobby. I think it's around 20, 25 bucks, 30 bucks. I don't know, somewhere in there. Being a plastic model, you're going to need some plastic model cement. I personally like the Tamiya Extra Thin Cement. I just find it more forgiving and easier to handle. If you want to use the good old Testors Tube Cement or a different brand of liquid cement, that's totally up to you. As long as it's plastic cement and it sticks plastic together, you're good to go. Going to need some basic tools like an X-Acto knife or some kind of blade, some kind of cutter. You can use this to trim up parts, clean up parts. You can even use it for removing the parts from the sprues. Highly recommend some tweezers. Don't need anything fancy. You can go down to the drugstore and pick up a pair of tweezers. Anything that'll help you grab small parts. You're also going to need some paintbrushes. Varying sizes would be helpful. You don't need anything really big. A couple medium sizes, maybe one larger size, and maybe a fine one. You want to try and get into any detail or do any touch-ups. Of course, to go along with the paintbrushes, you're going to need some paint. I'm using a brand called Vallejo. It's a water-based acrylic. I personally love these. They are very forgiving. They self-level very well. And because I don't have any ventilation in my workbench, these are fantastic because they do not have a offensive odor. Anyways, if you go through the instructions, for the main body of the tank, it's going to suggest an olive drab. I did one in olive drab and I really didn't care for it. If you want to go ahead and use an olive drab, you're more than welcome to. I ended up going with a US dark green. This is what I ended up using for the body, and I actually think it came out pretty well. Again, you can use the olive drab if you want, or any shade of green that you happen to like or think will look good. You're also going to need just a black. You're going to need a brown of some kind. I don't have just a straight brown, so I'm actually using camo medium brown, camouflage medium brown. It's pretty basic brown. It works for a brown. If you can get a color similar or just a straight brown, you'll be doing just fine. I'm also going to be using gunmetal. That's for the machine gun that sits up on top. A red, and it calls for a silver. One quick note on the paints that I just showed you. Vallejo comes in two flavors for models. You got a model color, you got a model air. You can brush both of them. If you do pick up the Vallejos though for hand painting, I suggest the model colors. They're more suited for it. The model airs are actually designed for airbrushes, so while you can hand paint them, they are definitely much thinner than the regular model colors. You're also going to need some water. The decals. You're going to need something to soak the decals in. Any kind of little dish will do. Some sanding sticks and some sandpaper. But you can go get, a nail file or just regular sandpaper from the hobby store. You don't have to go buy specialty sanding things. These are just things that I happen to have. I need some Q-tips, also for the decals. And you'll, of course, need some paper towels. And then the one thing I suggest is sprue cutters. Now, these are dedicated sprue cutters made by, modeling companies for plastic models. You don't have to go out and spend the money on specialty sprue cutters. Any kind of offset pliers, small electronics, as long as it's an offset, so it makes it easier to get in and snip the parts off the sprues. If you can't get a hold of one of these, that's fine. This is not mandatory. This is just one of the few tools that, while it's not necessary, it really does make your life easier, especially if you have a pair of offset pliers or offset cutters kicking around. So that's it. That's all you need. So when you open up your box, you're going to find a whole bunch of these things called sprues. Some call them runners, call them trees. I've always called them sprues. This particular sprue is of the figures. As I said in the beginning, though, we're not going to be doing the figures. I just wanted to grab this particular sprue out of the box just to really quickly go through how to remove parts from the sprues for those people who may have never done it, may not know, may have questions. If you already know all this, by all means, skip ahead to step one. Depending on the tool that you have, let's say you have the X-Acto knife, all you're going to want to do is find a part you want to take off. Let's say this arm. I'm going to take this arm off. You're going to want to find where it connects to the sprue. Seems pretty obvious. You're just going to want to press down and cut it off. The reason that I held my finger on the part is actually a habit that I've forced myself to get into, especially with smaller parts, whether you're using the blade or using the cutters. Physics has a nasty way of setting these things flying. So I try to secure the part as best I can, either with my finger or hold my hand down or cup it, something to prevent that part from flying. If you have cutters, it's actually much easier. You want the flat side, this side, to be close to the part. And what that's going to let you do is get real up close and tight to the part, just snip it right off, and that's it. That's all you have to do. Now you can see, if you did it right, you actually have a relatively clean part. So regardless of whether or not you use the offset cutters or the X-Acto knife to remove your parts, you will always, or I shouldn't say always, you will usually find the part might have some cleanup that needs to be done. Beam line right there, or from where you snipped it, you might not get an exactly clean cut. I'm not sure how well that'll show up, but you can see a little nub there right at the tippy top. A few ways you can take care of that. You can use your knife. If you have a seam on this arm, I suggest using the back end of the knife. You can just gently scrape it off. Don't have to go hard. Don't have to do a lot of pressure. A gentle scrape. You'll actually see it kind of change color, and that's how you know you're gonna get it off. And you can use your finger to quickly feel it and see if it's smooth. That's one way to do it. I'm not sure why. Modelers also have a propensity to go at this thing like you're whittling. That's probably one of the main reasons why it's suggested that young children have parental supervision so that they can stop them from doing something stupid. But as adults, there's no one there to stop us from doing something stupid, except for ourselves, and we're not very good at it. But I see people who will go at it like this, and they'll whittle. I even do it myself, so definitely no judgment here. However, if you notice while you're doing this kind of whittling, where's the bottom of that blade going right into your thumb? You can do this forever and never have a problem, but you will eventually have a problem. So if you find yourself doing the whittling method with an X-Acto knife, there's one extra piece of equipment that you're going to need. Alright, so that's enough of that. Let's move on to the build. First step is pretty easy. 5 parts. You got 2 axles, a centerpiece, and 2 hooks. The axles, all you need to do is make sure you check the orientation. They fit right into the hole, nice and snug. And you take your liquid cement and you can either just dab it and let it run around the edge, or if you're like me and you want to really make sure it's in there, feel free to brush it all along the seam. Either way, it doesn't matter. Centerpiece is going to sit right in. If it doesn't seem to fit right, you can take your sandpaper and do a quick sanding along the mating edges. This is the part that's going to secure the upper hull to the lower hull. And again, you can either just use the brush, hit a corner and let capillary action pull the cement through, or you can run it along the seam. It really doesn't matter, whatever you're comfortable with. As far as the hooks go, you might have to take some pliers and just snip off a little tiny bead on the end. It should just be a regular tow hook. Make sure that the hook is aligned right, pointing up. And for this, it doesn't really hold itself into place. So what I like to do is take a little bit of the glue and just kind of run it around the hole. And when you put your part in, the glue will actually hold it there while it dries and sets up. First up are the drive wheels on the back of the tank. These are keyed, has a little slot, little tab, just make sure those are aligned. Take one of your poly caps, little black plastic. This is what allows this wheel to spin. Do not glue the poly cap into place, just set it down in the hole and then snap the 2 parts together, run a bead of cement and repeat for the second one. The forward wheels are going to go together just like the drive wheels or the sprockets that are on the back. The only difference is it uses a slightly different poly cap, so make sure you check your parts carefully. I believe it's P1 in the instructions and P1 on the tree. It's slightly bigger. Slide the poly cap in, make the 2 halves, run a little bit of glue along the seam, and repeat. Now that you have the rear wheels and the forward wheels done, you can put them onto the chassis. Just make sure you put them on the right end. Rear wheels are on the back, forward wheels are on the front. Remember not to glue them in place. They are meant to spin freely, and it's really important that they do to make it easier later on when you put the tracks on. Next up are the rollers. There's no poly caps for these. These are the 2 small pieces. Just make sure you check your orientation so that when the 2 pieces are together, there's a small gap between the halves, and that's it. You can glue these together and set them aside, 6 in all. Then you're going to move on to the road wheels. These are very similar to the front wheels. You got 2 halves and a poly cap. Put the poly cap in the recess, push the 2 halves together, glue them together. Do that 10 times. And you got a full set of road wheels. Now, the rollers don't actually sit very tight. As you can see, I'm putting them in, but you tilt it and they fall out. So what I found is easier is to just put these aside until later when you're ready to put the track on. The road wheels, however, with the polycaps in place, will sit snugly on the axles. So by all means, put those on. You should have 10 road wheels, and if you want, you can even go broom broom play a little bit. When it comes to putting some of the small bits on the rear of the tank, what you're going to find is that a lot of times these pieces don't fit snugly in the holes. So what I like to do is take a little cement and run it on the outside of the edge. That way when I put the smaller piece in, the glue will actually hold it in place while it dries. You don't have to use a lot. In fact, in a couple of these spots I'm using a little more than I need, but really it doesn't matter. We're going to paint it so the glue marks aren't going to show anyways. So while the bar sits in place nicely, this part right here, I'm going to totally admit, I'm not really sure exactly how it's supposed to sit. The instructions, it's an older kit, older set of instructions. To me, it's not real clear how it's supposed to sit there. I've built 3 of these, and I'm still not 100% comfortable with my placement on there. So the best that I can suggest is fiddle with it, get into a position that you like or you believe is right, and just glue it into place. And as you can see, I'm starting with the parts that tend to lay a little bit flatter. Whenever I'm building anything, any parts that tend to stick out, protrude from the model, I like to save till the end. In fact, if I'm able to, I'll save them to the very end, last, after I built everything else. In this case, it just happens to be part of step 2. Because the problem is, once you get those in place, now you have to be careful when you're handling the model, moving it around, that you don't bump it, knock them off. These last 2 parts are what I was referring to. I'm not a tank engineer or a tank expert, so I'm not exactly sure what they are. If anybody does know, by all means, let me know. I love to learn stuff. Whereas you could have put these on at any point, I saved them till the end because they do stick out quite a bit. And I just have a habit of knocking off anything that tends to stick out, so I save them till last. Constructing the gun barrel is very straightforward. This is one of those cases where, while liquid cement is designed to touch a seam and let capillary action draw it along the edge, the 2 halves of the gun barrel sit pretty tight together, so you really don't have a good seam in there. So I just take the 2 halves of the gun barrel, run the glue along the inside, stick them together, press them together. Might take my fingers and run it along the seam to make sure there's no excess glue sticking out, but whatever works for you. Then assembling the shroud, just want to make sure that that inside portion is aligned correctly. It should set right in, should glue right in. Then you're just going to push the gun barrel into place. When we get to the turret, this is where things really start to kind of come together and start looking like a tank. You're going to take the barrel assembly that you just finished. You're going to set it down on the bottom half of the turret. You want to be careful where you apply the glue to it, if you do, because gun barrel is meant to move up and down. So if you get glue on any of the moving parts, it's going to fix itself in place. So just be careful where you put the glue. And then again, because the seam is kind of tight when it does get together, I run the glue along the inside of the bottom of the turret. Then I take the top of the turret, get into place, press it all together. And on this one, I do take a quick swipe along the edge where there's a little bit of a gap, just so when I press it together, what'll happen is the plastic will actually melt and fuse that seam real nice and tight. Next 2 parts to assemble are these 2 little covers that go on. Again, I'm not a tank engineer, so I don't know technically what they are, But when you get them aligned properly, you'll know because they should set right into place and look like one unit. Take the glue, touch the seams, everything's good. The rear vent cover, I just run a little bit of glue along the inside, take the cover, align it properly, press it down, hold it for a couple seconds, and move on. This is the first part that I actually had some trouble with. The idea is that when you put the hatch in place, you're able to open and close it. You want to be careful where you put the glue. And what I have found is getting the hatch in place on the two elbows that go down inside the holes, it tends to fall out and flop around quite a bit. So the easiest way I found to do it is to put one of the elbows in and then slide the hatch pin into that elbow and put the second elbow on. That's how I found it easiest to do. You may find a better way. I hope you do. These two little antennas, I just take the cement and I run a little bit around the hole and then just drop them in. You then have a series of grab bars that go on the outside of the tank. You just take a little bit of glue, you actually brush off the excess and just put little dots. They'll hold the grab bar into place when you stick it to the side. And there I just had too much glue. It happens. Anyways, using tweezers, take the grab bars, align them up with the divots. Again, you should be able to see them clearly. And you don't have to push hard. Because you have a little bit of glue there, and the grab bars are so small, they'll just hold themselves in place. You just want to be careful not to bump them too much while they're drying. And then just, I think there's 4 in total. Now all those parts primarily went on one side of the turret. We're just going to rotate the turret and start attaching the smaller bits to it. First up though, we got to put together the machine gun. Can't have a tank without a machine gun. Pretty straightforward. Got 4 parts. You got the barrel. Yeah, you got the barrel, you got the mount, ammo box, and the shelf that the ammo box sits on. Just a little tiny bit of glue with all the parts made up. Ideally, you should let it sit and dry a little bit longer than I did because in a moment you're going to see that it's easy, it falls out easily. If that happens, you just, stick it back in. Just be careful not to get any glue on the mount itself. Unless you want the guns fixed in a specific position, then by all means, glue away. Got the back panel that just sits right in there. I did find that it didn't really align well. What I ended up having to do is between a little bit of sanding, a little bit of shaping, and hold it together, squeeze it tightly until the glue sets up. The gas can's on the rear. I just take a little bit of glue, swipe it around the area that it mounts, put the can where it sits, and then just give it a little press. Now we're back to the smaller pieces. These are some hooks, which they're a little tricky to handle. In some cases the tweezers might help. I actually found a couple cases where using my fingers was better. You have 2 choices. You can either maneuver and wiggle it into the hole until you feel it snap, or you can take a little bit of sandpaper or like the edge of your X-Acto knife, widen the hole just a hair so it sits in a little bit easier. Whichever way feels better to you. By all means, your model, do it the way it's comfortable. But once you get them in the hole, dab a little bit of cement, or again, add a little cement before you put it in, and they'll stay in. It's just a little tricky getting them in. And you're gonna have 4 in total. 2 on the side you're working on now, and 2 on the previous side. So hopefully you enjoyed putting the grab bars on in the earlier step, because now we have double the grab bars to put on this side. That's 8 in total. Same deal, just a little bit of glue to hold them in place. Find the divots, just stick them on there. I'm going to speed the video up a little bit just to get through this a little bit quicker, but it's basically the same process for each one. And now, of course, stick your machine gun in there. It completes the turret. So we're nearing the end. It's now time to finish off the upper hull. Start off with 2 sets of headlights. They just set into their assigned spots. A little bit of glue holds them in place. They're going to attach the spare tank tread. Followed by a set of tools. There's then 2 protective cages that are going to go over the headlights. When you go to remove these from the sprue, really pay attention to where you're cutting. The part that's going to come off is going to have 4 legs and a frame that go over the headlights. Really not that bad. You just want to make sure you pay attention and you don't snip off the wrong part. Those are going to set right into place so you can see the divots and the holes where that goes. As then the exhaust pipes, these can be a little tricky. They actually go in from the underside. And what you're going to want to do is look at the part and you're going to see a little tab. That part's going to go down. And as you slide it in, you give it a little push and it'll snap in that little square section. So you'll know it's in there when you get that little snap. This little hatch cover is actually meant so that you can open it and put a figure in there if you want. I didn't glue it in place. I don't know if in the future I'm going to want to open it up or not. You can glue it in place if you want, or you can just set it in place like I did, in case in the future you want to do the figures. And this last part for the upper hull is the arm that secures the barrel. Now, it does snap in there. It will get in there. It's going to take a little bit of coaxing, and it can feel a little nerve-wracking because you do have to kind of force it a little bit, but if you're careful, you're able to get it in there. This part also does not get glued. That way, if you want to display the tank with the gun barrel secured, you can, or not. And now it's all that's left for the construction phase is to put it all together. I am going to apologize I didn't get good video of the whole process of assembling the tracks. Basically, you're going to roll the tracks up on each other, and you're going to see 4 little pins and 4 little holes. Pins go in the holes. Then you heat up a X-Acto knife or a screwdriver or some flat piece of metal. Press it down over those rubber pins, and it'll actually melt them into place. You can now put the rollers in, because you're about to put the tracks on. And once the tracks are on, it'll actually hold the rollers into place for the most part. I still have them fall out from time to time, but you know, it happens. The tracks being rubber, there is some flexibility. You don't want to pull too much. I actually haven't tested how far you can pull these or how far you can stretch these before they snap. I just haven't felt like tempting it. But once you get the track on the bottom, you can then get the track up on the top. I like to stretch it towards the sprocket. What happens is you stretch it just far enough to get over the sprocket, and then you can kind of start spinning and guiding it onto the sprocket, and you'll know it's completely on there when you see the little sprockets sticking through the tracks. Once you do it for one side, you do it for the other. and then your tracks are on. One thing to note is you do want to check the orientation of the treads. Remember the box cover, you're actually looking at it from the back, so when the tracks do go on, you want the treads to kind of point upwards. The third's pretty self-explanatory. You're going to line up the keys in the hole, snap it in, turn it into place. Then you're going to set the whole assembly on top of the lower hull. Might take a little finagling to get it into place, but you should hear that little clip snap into place, which will initially hold it in. And then if you don't like the way the seams look around the outside, you certainly can take a little bit of glue, run them along the seams, hold them together, and secure them that way. Once you're comfortable that everything is secure and everything is in place, you can give it a quick 360 look-see, make sure everything looks good, and there you have it. Your kit is constructed. But why stop there? Let's throw some color on this. So we're going to do a quick field chip because I have bad ventilation in my work area. I am going to use a spray can of primer. You do not have to. If you want to, any spray can of primer will do. Just give it nice even coats over the whole thing. It'll give you a nice uniform surface on which to work. This particular product is something called Mr. Surfacer by a company called Mr. Hobby. As I believe I said in the beginning, I am not a master hand painter. There are some people who can hand paint and come up with a finish that I swear looks like it came right out of an airbrush, and it's absolutely amazing. I am not one of those people. But some basics for hand painting. You want to make sure that when you're applying the paint, you want to try to go in the same direction as much as possible. On something like this, it's a little bit difficult because we have so many odd shapes and angles. And you also want to try and go on thin. You don't want to gob it on. You don't want to slap it on. And as you can see, it doesn't look all that great. But what you're going to do is you're going to do multiple coats. Your first coat's not going to look fantastic. You let that dry. And then as you can see, once we start to apply the second coat, it actually starts to look better, look more full. And for this particular one, I did 3 coats. And as you can see, it actually doesn't look too bad. I do have a few brush marks in there. One way to avoid that is don't overwork the paint. Once I finished the body, and I was happy with where that was at, I then went on to doing the tracks and the road wheels. Now the road wheels, you might want to use a smaller brush if you have one. And as you're painting the black areas on the outside of the wheel, don't worry too much if you get a little bit on the hubs or you get a little bit on the green. You can always go back and touch that up very quickly. Take a small brush and alternate between the black and the green, touching up any areas that you went over on. Once all that is set aside and dry, we can go on to painting the details. I apologize, I did not get good video of the spread track that sits on the outside of the tank. You're just going to paint that black along with the antennas. And then to simulate windows, you're just going to use a silver on these little oval areas. Again, don't worry too much if you get a little bit outside the lines. You can always go back in with the green and clean it up a little bit afterwards. Using the same silver, you're going to go and paint all the metal parts of the tools. You got the 3 parts in the toolbox, the axe head, shovel head, and I think it's a pick, like a pickaxe head, something like that. Not really sure. And then don't forget to spin the model around and paint the sledgehammer head on the other side. Then using the brown paint, you're going to paint the handles of the tools. It's going to simulate wood. Actually doesn't look too bad. Just remember you got the sledgehammer on the one side, and then you got the toolbox on the other side. Sticking with the brown, you can then paint the leather straps and the gas cans. And then you can quickly go back to the silver and paint the buckles if you want. It's just a nice little touch. And if you really feel like it, you can take the brown and paint a little bit of leather within the belt buckle. I didn't on this part, but by all means, give it a shot. Then going to a wider brush, you're going to stick with the brown and you're going to paint the mufflers on the back of the tank. This is going to kind of simulate a rusty color. You don't have to do a full coverage. In fact, if you just put one coat on and let a little bit of that green peek through, it actually will look a little more like a weathered muffler than just a brown muffler. And last, we move on to the decals. Now, what I'm going to show here is an incredibly basic way to apply decals. It's basically how all of us started out, especially as kids. You just need some water, the decals, some Q-tips or something to blot up water, and a paper towel. What you're going to do is cut the decal off the decal sheet, and you're going to stick it in the water. I like to put them in face down. I think it helps loosen them up quicker. I could just be fooling myself, but it makes me feel better. Once they sit in the water a little bit, you can test them, take them out of the water with some tweezers and just move them with your finger. If they move easily, they're ready to apply to the model. Blot a little of the excess water off. Position the decal where you want it on the model. Slide the decal off the paper into position. You can use the edge of tweezers or even the tip of your X-Acto knife to help position the decal a little bit better. If you need to, you can wet it to let it move a little easier. And then use the Q-tip to blot up any extra water. And you're going to do this for 3 stars, 2 sets of numbers on the turret, and then 2 sets of numbers on the front and back. Same process for each. Now, if you continue building models, there is a little bit of a, I don't want to say advanced way of doing decals, but there are some products out there that do make decaling a little bit easier, but we're not going to get into those today. I will get into those in a different video, but for today, we are just doing the absolute basic build possible. And the last thing I did was take a little bit of red, paint the lights on the back. And at this point I am going to take a moment and apologize. I'm not sure where the footage went of me painting the gun. Use the gunmetal paint that I had mentioned at the very beginning of the video. And you're going to paint the gun itself. Then using the same color that you used for the body of the tank, you're going to paint the mount, and ammo box, and shelf. Again, I apologize. But once you get that done and you get that dried and you drop that into place, and you're done. Congratulations, you have built a Walker M41 Bulldog. Now, granted, this whole process was done straight from the box. No frills, no special effects, no weathering, no dirtying, no rusting, none of that stuff. But you know what? You don't have to, especially if you're just a beginner. Focus on the building, focus on basic painting, get the basic skills down, and then move on to that other stuff. In fact, believe it or not, you never have to move on to that other stuff. There's a lot of fantastic modelers who like to build nice, clean, out-of-the-box models, and they look fantastic. Regardless of where you go with this, if you decide to do more, if you decide you like it, if you decide to go full-blown and hyper-realistic, or you just want to keep it basic, just enjoy it. Hopefully you did enjoy it. Hopefully you stick with it, because it's an incredibly rewarding and slightly addicting hobby. And you can go all kinds of places with it. Regardless, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for spending some time with me. I really appreciate it. If you like this, if this helped you out in any way, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, or even drop a comment. Let me know. If there's something I could have done better, let me know that too. I'm just starting out in this YouTube world, so I'll take any advice I can get. But that's enough of me. Again, thanks for stopping by, and have a great night.